Okay, this is a Jataka tale. Um, in the ancient India, before things were written down in books, and certainly before television, internet, and all of that, one of the main ways of passing down wisdom and teaching was in fables, in stories. And in ancient India, there was a whole accumulation of fables. When the Buddhists came along in the 5th century BC in India, they adopted some of these fables as their own, which of course they were their own. It was their own culture. But what they did was they shifted them and made the main character in the fables, and it was usually an animal, represent the Buddha. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But I'll also say that many of these fables also traveled into Greece and became part of the Aesop's fables. So these kind of were spread. Now, the Buddhists made the main character an early birth of the Buddha. In the ancient India, and still today, many people in Asia, and quite a number of Westerners too, believed in rebirth. And the basic idea with regard to the Buddha was that he went through many lifetimes working his way to greater and greater understanding and enlightenment until his final rebirth as Siddhartha Gautama. He became the Buddha, an enlightened and awakened being. So this is a story about an earlier existence of the Buddha. I'm going to be reading this to you. It is actually a story about a deer called the Banyan deer. And it appears in a wonderful compilation of stories by Rafe Martin called The Hungry Tigress. And he gives many of these ancient fables, and I always loved being read to. And I still do. So I thought maybe you'll enjoy it. I could tell it, but I think it's better to read it. So I'm going to read you this fable. Once, the Buddha was born as a banyan deer. Now, banyan in this case refers to the banyan tree. Banyan tree in India is a tree that puts down many aerial roots, prop roots. They come down from the branches and then they grow down kind of like stalactites and into the ground. And eventually this tree covers huge amount of space, and it becomes hard even to tell in a mature tree what's the main trunk and what's an aerial root. Anyway, they call them the banyan deer because there's so many of these, and it was like coming down from there. You turn it this way, and it represented the antlers of the banyan deer. So this banyan deer, at birth, and here's how he was described. At his birth, he was golden of hue. His eyes were like round jewels. The sheen of his horns was as of silver. His mouth was red, as a bunch of scarlet cloth. His 4 hooves were as though lacquered. His tail was like a yak's. I'm sure that's significant. We don't maybe get it, but I'm sure that was significant. And he was big as a young foal. When he was grown, he became the leader of the herd. He guided his herd wisely and led them to the heart of a secluded forest where, sheltered by the giant trees, they lived free from danger. Then a new king came into power over the land. And above all things, this king loved hunting. As soon as the sun rose, he would mount his horse and lead his men on a furious chase through the fields and meadows, forests, and glens. Shooting his arrows madly, he would not leave off until the sun had set. Then the wagons rolled back to the palace after him, filled now with deer and boar and rabbit and pheasant and monkey and leopard and bear and tiger and lion. And the king was happy. His people, however, were not happy. Fields had been ruined by the royal hunt. Farmers and merchants had been forced to leave off their work in order to beat the jungles and drive the hidden beasts toward the waiting king and his men. Affairs of state also lay unattended. The people determined to bring all this to an end and devised a simple plan. They built a stockade deep in the forest. We'll trap a herd or two of deer in this stockade, they said. Then the king can hunt all he wants. Let him hunt to his heart's content. He won't ruin our fields, or force us to leave our shops. Then let him be happy. The stockade was built, and 2 herds of deer were driven within its walls. The gates were closed, and the delicate animals, charging and wheeling in frantic circles, sought some way out. But there was none. Exhausted at last, they stood trembling, awaiting their fate. The men left happily to tell the king of their success. One of the herds that had been captured was the herd of the banyan deer. The banyan deer walked among his herd. Sunlight played on his many-branched antlers. His black eyes shone and his muzzle was wet. The blue sky is overhead. Grass grows under our feet, he told the others. Do not give up. Where there is life, there is hope. I'll find a way. And so he strove to ease their fears. Soon the king arrived to view the newly captured herds. He was pleased. He strung his bow in preparation for the hunt. Noticing the 2 deer kings below, he said, "The leaders of both herds are magnificent animals. No one is to shoot them. They shall be spared." Then, standing on the wall, looking down over the stockade, he sent his arrows flying into the milling herd. The deer became frantic. Racing wildly, they injured one another with horns and hooves as they sought to escape the deadly rain of arrows. And so it went. Every few days, the king and his courtiers would return to the stockade. And every few days, more of the gentle deer were killed. Many others were wounded by the flying arrows. Still others were injured in the effort to escape. The king of the banyan deer met with the leader of the other herd. "Brother," he said, shaking his antlered head sadly, "we are trapped. I've tried every way, but all are barred against us. The pain of our subjects suffer is unbearable. As you know, when the arrows fly, many get badly hurt just trying to stay alive. Let us hold a lottery. Each day, all the deer, 1 day from your herd, 1 day from mine, must pick a straw. Then the one single deer on whom the lottery falls will go stand near the wall just below the king. That one deer must offer itself to be shot. It is a terrible solution, but at least this way we can keep many from needless injury and pain." And the leader of the other herd agreed. The next day, when the king and his courtiers arrived, they found one trembling deer standing directly below them. Its legs and body were shaking, but it held its head high. "What is this?" said the king. "Ah, I see. These are noble deer indeed. They have chosen that one deer alone shall die rather than that they should all suffer from our hunt. Those deer kings have wisdom." A heaviness descended on the king's heart. "We will accept their terms," he announced. "From now on, shoot only the one deer that stands below." And unstringing his bow, he descended from the stockade wall and rode back in silence to the palace. That night, the king tossed and turned, a radiant deer pacing through his dreams. One day, the lot fell on a pregnant doe. She went to her king, the leader of the other herd, and said, "I will willingly go and fulfill the lottery once my fawn is safely born. But if I go now, both I and my unborn child will die. Please spare me for now. I do not ask for myself, but for the sake of the child that is soon to be born." But the leader of the other herd said, "The law is the law. I cannot spare you. The lottery has fallen on you, and you must die. There are no exceptions. Justice demands that you go." In desperation, she ran to the banyan deer. She fell on her knees before him and begged for his aid. He listened quietly, observing her with wide and gentle eyes. "Rise, sister," said the banyan deer, "and go free. You are right. The terms of the lottery require that only one need die. Therefore you shall be freed from the lottery until your fawn is born. I will see that it is done." Too overjoyed for words, the grateful doe bowed and then bounded away. The banyan deer rose to his feet. There was no other he could send to take her place. He had spared her. Therefore he himself must replace her. How could it be otherwise? He walked calmly, with great dignity, through his browsing herd. They watched him as he moved among them. His great curving antlers and strong shoulders, his shining eyes, and sharp black hooves all reassured and comforted them. Never had their banyan deer king let them down. Never had he abandoned them. If there was a way, he would find it. If there was a chance to save another, he would take it. Not once had he lorded it over them. He was a king indeed, and his whole herd took comfort in his presence. The courtiers were waiting with arrows drawn atop the stockade. When they saw it was the king deer who had come to stand below, they called out, "O king of the banyan deer, you know our king has spared you. Why are you here?" The deer answered, "I have come so that 2 others need not die. Now shoot. You have your work, and I have mine." But lowering their bows, they sent a message to the king, "Your Majesty, come with all speed to the stockade." Not long after, the king arrived, riding like the wind, with his robes streaming behind him. "What is it?" he called. "Why have you summoned me?" "Come, Your Majesty," his men called. "Look." The banyan deer stood below. Then the deer king and the human king looked at one another. "Banyan king," the king said at last, "I know you. I have seen you gliding through the forests of my dreams. Why are you here? Have I not freed you from my hunt?" "Great king," replied the banyan deer, "what ruler can be free if the people suffer? Today a doe with fawn asked for my aid. The lottery had fallen on her, and both she and her unborn fawn were to die. The lottery requires only that one shall die. I shall be that one. I shall take her place. The lottery shall be fulfilled. This is my right and my duty as king." A stone rolled from the king's heart. "Noble banyan deer," he said, "you are right. A king should care for the least of his subjects. It is a lesson I have been long in learning. But today, through your sacrifice, you have made it clear to me. So I shall give you a gift, a teacher's fee for the lesson you have taught me. You and your whole herd are free. None of you shall be hunted again. Go and live in peace." But the banyan deer said, "Great king, that is indeed a noble gift. But I cannot leave yet. May I speak further?" "Speak on, noble deer." "O king of men, if I depart to safety with my own herd, will that not mean that the remaining herd shall simply suffer all the more? Each day you shall kill only them. They will have no respite. A rain of arrows will fall upon them. While I desire, above all things, the safety of my people, I cannot buy it at the cost of increasing the suffering of others. Do you understand?" The human king was stunned. "What?" he exclaimed. Would you then risk your own and your herd's freedom for others? Yes, said the banyan deer. I would. I will. Think of their anguish, great king. Imagine their sufferings, and then let them too go free. The king of men paused, and he pondered. At last he lifted his head and smiled. Never have I seen such nobility or such resolute concern. How can I refuse you? You shall have your wish. The other herd too shall go free. Now, can you go off with your own herd and be at peace? But the banyan deer answered, No, great king, I cannot. I think of all the other wild four-footed creatures. Like them, I have lived my life surrounded by dangers and fears. How could I live in peace knowing the terrors they must endure? I beg you, great king, have pity on them. There can be no peace unless they too are free. The king of men was again astonished. He had never imagined such a thing. He thought, and slowly the truth of the banyan deer's words grew clear to him. It was true, he realized. There's no real peace unless its benefits extend to all. You are right, great deer, said the king of men at last. Never again in all my realm shall any four-footed creature be slain. They are all freed from my hunt. Rabbit, boar, deer, lion, leopard, tiger, deer, all. Never again shall they fall to my huntsman's arrow. So, my teacher, have you now found peace? But the banyan deer said, No, great king, I have not. What, my lord, of the defenseless ones of the air? The birds, great king, live surrounded by a net of danger. Stones and arrows shall greet them now whenever they fly. They shall fall from the skies like a rain throughout your kingdom. They shall know such suffering as can hardly be imagined. O great king, I beg you, let them go free. Release them also. Great one, the king of men said, you drive a hard bargain and are determined, it seems, to make farmers of all of us. But yes, I shall free the birds. They may now fly freely throughout my realm. No man shall hunt them again. Then they may build their nests in peace. Now are you satisfied? Are you at last at peace? Great king, answered the banyan deer, think, if you will, of the silent ones of your realm, the fish, my lord. If I do not speak now for them, who will? While they swim the lakes and rivers and streams of your land, hooks, nets, and spears will ever be poised above them. How can I have peace while they abide in such danger? Great king, I beg you, spare them as well. Noble being, said the king of men, tears trickling down his cheek. Compassionate one, never before have I been moved to think in such a way. But yes, I do agree. The fish too are of my kingdom, and they too shall be free. They shall swim throughout my land, and no one shall kill them again. Now all you assembled courtiers and attendants, announced the king, hear my words. This is my proclamation. See that it is posted throughout the land. From this day forth, all beings in my realm shall be recognized as my own dear subjects. None shall be trapped, hunted, or killed. This is my lasting decree. See to it that it is fulfilled. Now tell me, noble one, he said, turning to the banyan deer once more, are you at peace? Flocks of birds flew overhead and perched, singing from among the nearby trees. Deer grazed calmly on the green grass. Yes, said the banyan deer, now I am at peace. And he leapt up, kicking like a fawn. He leapt for joy, sheer joy. He had saved them all. Then he thanked the king, and gathering his herd, departed with them back into the depths of the forest. The king had a stone pillar set on the spot where he had spoken with the banyan deer. Carved upon it was the figure of a deer, encircled with these words, "Homage to the noble banyan deer, compassionate teacher of kings." Then he lived on, caring wisely for all things. So, this is the story, the sweet story of the banyan deer. And the banyan deer, of course, represented the Buddha in an earlier birth. And it contains teachings about, it embodies, I guess you could say, teachings about the Buddha's later teachings of the heavenly mind states, what he called the Brahma Viharas, the heavenly abodes. The Buddha taught that there are 4 mind states that if they are cultivated and practiced by humans, they will be conducive to happiness. People will live with light and happiness and will make great progress toward awakening. And those 4 mind states are loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. And the Buddha spoke about each of these. And I'd like to just say a few words about each of these. And we've talked about them often here. Loving kindness, also in Pali called metta. And I think we can say this is the key, like the pivot to these other mind states. Loving kindness is a tender regard for all things. It's not an emotion. It's not a rising up of a warm and fuzzy feeling. It's a feeling of simply an open kindliness to all things, an impartial kindliness. It's not like appreciating some and feeling open and kindly to some and not to them over there. It's more like the sun that shines everywhere on all things without discriminating. Loving kindness. The Buddha also taught, and he really liked to do this, he had a lot of analysis. He said the far enemy, that is the opposite of, he taught the opposite of loving kindness is ill will, aversion. And he said the near enemy, and I think we can see that, loving kindness and aversion is its opposite. The near enemy, what masquerades or looks like and might be taken for loving kindness but isn't, is attachment. So the loving kindness is impartial. It's not about possession, not my, you fill in the blank, but it is an impartial, open kindliness to all things. And in this story, I think you can see the banyan deer certainly expressed loving kindness to all animals, not just his own herd, to all animals. And I think we can say the king at the beginning of this story displayed the opposite. And I think this is something interesting to look at, because the king himself, I think if he had been asked at the beginning, are you displaying ill will, he would have said no. He loved to hunt. The effect of loving to hunt, in fact, was to have murder in mind. Yes? And certainly that is a form of ill will. And of course he shifted, he changed in the story. But I say this because I think that it is really a point that we might want to bear in mind. Sometimes when we pursue one goal, maybe we're not out hunting, but we have other goals. And in the pursuit of those goals, we need to be aware of what attitudes. Are we displaying loving kindness in the pursuit of this goal? Is perhaps a byproduct of it not loving kindness? Just to be aware, to ask ourselves. The heart of loving kindness, of course, is to bring it to ourselves. And we've talked many, many times here. I'm not going to go into great detail, but it's such an important teaching. The Buddha said you can search the world over and find no one more worthy of love than you yourself. And he meant you. He meant me. He meant everybody. He's not like all these other people, but not me. He meant everybody. You yourself. You need to be the recipient of your own loving kindness. So loving kindness, just a critical part of our mindfulness practice. The second of these Brahma Viharas, these heavenly mind states, is compassion. And compassion means bringing a sense of loving kindness to those beings who are suffering. Loving kindness to people or other beings who are suffering. You know, often we can feel sorry for someone who is suffering. That's not compassion. Compassion is feeling sorry with someone who is suffering. Do you see the difference? Feeling sorry with someone who is suffering. One of my favorite quotes, I heard a long time ago, I've got it here. It's another story of a Maori woman. I don't exactly know what her circumstance was, but someone came to help her, and she said, let me read it because I want to get it right. She said, if you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is caught up with mine, then come, let's work together. Do you hear the difference? If you see yourself as helping someone, that's a sense of perhaps pity, feeling sorry for. You and that other being are in it together. You're working together, each in your own roles. That's compassion. That's compassion. Now, the far enemy, the opposite of compassion, the Buddha said, is cruelty. And the near enemy is pity, meaning it can look and masquerade kind of like compassion, but it's not. It's coming from a place that's not really compassionate. It can be actually kind of arrogant, can't it? Or selfish. Now, I think we can say that here, the Banyan deer, of course, certainly displayed compassion for all animals. And that's really, really clear. And compassion needs to start with ourselves. Once again, that's these Brahma Viharas. It's starting with yourself in your own heart, bringing it to yourself when you are suffering. What an important lesson for us, especially for us, I would say. I don't mean just us here, but us as Westerners. We are so harsh on ourselves. You know, don't you often dismiss or just run right by your own suffering? Playing it down, oh, well, either it's not important or, well, yeah, but, and you kind of put it aside. No, we need to bring, the Brahma Viharas have to start, these heavenly mind states have to start with us. So bringing compassion home to yourself. And then, through that, we begin to break down barriers with others because we see, you know what? Their suffering really isn't different from mine. You need to see it from the inside out. Yeah, maybe a different specific cause, but suffering is suffering. And when we really understand it directly in our own life, you see it and can offer it to others. So, the second, compassion. The third mind state, appreciative joy. That is taking joy, bringing loving kindness to others in their happiness, in their good fortune. This is really a pretty... It's a mind state or a virtue that is not given much attention in our society, right? We don't think much about appreciative joy. You know, we may talk about the others a bit, but appreciative joy, it's not widely practiced. I think, again, we have to say, if we go look at the story, the Banyan deer certainly expressed appreciative joy. When at the end he leapt up and kicked for joy, sheer joy of all the animals whose lives were saved. Happiness for others in their own good fortune. Again, that includes ourselves. Can we be happy for ourselves and our good fortune? Once again, there's another kind of approach that we tend to bypass. We say, yes, but, yeah, that's great, but, and then we've got to go on to the things that are wrong rather than appreciating what's right, what's wonderful and beautiful. That's appreciative joy, starting from within. Much to say about that. And finally, the last of these mind states, equanimity. And that is an even-mindedness, a happiness, an impartiality. It's what one teacher, Ayakema, called the crowning glory of all mind states. It's based on the wisdom, that everything changes. There's nothing that doesn't change. The Buddha taught that at length. When everything changes, we need to find some kind of balance, some kind of equanimity amongst changing circumstances. Now, in this story I just read about the banyan deer, I don't think this played in very much, equanimity. But it is a major, and if anybody can find it, I'd be interested to know. I didn't look at it, but that's okay. This was a wonderful story for the other three mind states. There is a story that sometimes we tell that reflects equanimity. Again, it's an ancient teaching story. They're probably more modern than the one I've just read you. And it is a Chinese Zen story, which we have spoken of sometimes here, and I'll just quickly say that. And the story goes that there was a farmer in China, and one day a magnificent stallion appeared on his land, the land he was tilling. And everyone was so excited. Wow, this magnificent beast, you can use him, you can harness him, he can plow the land, he can be a great help. And this is such good fortune, they said to the farmer. And he said, oh, well, we'll see. And then one day, the farmer's son tried to ride this horse. And he fell off and broke his leg. And everyone said, oh, what terrible luck. I mean, you've lost now a son who was helping you on the land. This is really hard for you. And the farmer said, well, we'll see. Maybe. Shortly after that, an army came through. The armies were always coming through for one thing or another, and they were conscripting everybody every male within the vicinity. Well, the man had a broken leg. The young man had a broken leg, so they didn't conscript him. And then the neighbor said, oh, what wonderful luck. They didn't conscript your son. And he said, well, maybe. We'll see. And then what happened was that the stallion ran off. And again, oh, what terrible. You lost this magnificent stallion. Again, he said, maybe. We'll see. Then he returned with a mare. So the story will go on and on. Oh, what wonderful luck. This is what we do. This is what our minds do. The story is a really wonderful illustration of how our mind goes, isn't it? Oh, this is great. Oh, well, not so great. The impartiality, recognizing it in context, everything changes. Today it may be wonderful, and tomorrow it may change. That is life. It's the way it goes. So in our practice, we learn, we need to develop these. In fact, what the Buddha taught is that we need to develop all of these mind states. And in thinking about them, I think that at the end of the day, or maybe I'd say at the end of our lives, what will make us happier? What will be more fulfilling except to embody, to have developed, practiced with, and cultivated these mind states? This isn't a matter of waiting for them to arise as we sit on our cushion and watch our breath, though that we're making ourselves receptive. This is a matter of actively practicing each of these mind states, of cultivating them as you would cultivate and till the ground. And there are indeed meditations that enable us to do that. But not only in meditation, but of course in daily life as well. And I'd like to observe that I think this is not something that is commonly done in our society. In our society, especially it seems more and more these days, we kind of have this feeling like, you know, we have this feeling, I think, that strength is edginess and it's meanness and it's in-your-face stuff. We hear that all the time. And I think that if the Buddha, this had been presented to the Buddha, I'm speaking for him, I think he would say, no, that's not what strength is. Strength is developing these strong, these beautiful emotions that are wholesome and that lead to happiness. Unwholesome mind states, constricting mind states, never led us to happiness and will never lead one to happiness. So this is the teaching of the Banyan deer and the 4 noble heavenly abodes. Thank you. Are there any comments? We've got like 2 minutes. Any comments? Yes, Julie.
I was just thinking when you said that your work for equanimity was offering a story that the Banyan deer practiced a tremendous amount of equanimity when they were herded in and during the whole process, witnessing the deer being slaughtered, and then in that long negotiation with the king, not sort of
freaking out.
Yeah, always sort of remaining hopeful and faithful and equanimous, and that it wouldn't have worked if he had been righteous or critical or judging of the king. He remained
Thank you, Julie.
even throughout.
I think you're right. You're right. Thank you very much. Good. Anybody else? Yes, Emery.
Well, I was just thinking that sometimes there's only really in real life, most of the time, there's only so much you can do. I think the example that people in the West most commonly point to is Operation Burst. So, I mean, even he said that he didn't do enough.
Sure. And we can only do, right, we can only do what we can do. Yeah. And I think the Banyan deer stands as an example of a beautiful, beautiful approach that we can try to do our very best to emulate these mind states and not expect that we're going to change the world with it. We may, but just doing what we can without condition. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. We will see you again, we hope, next week.